But this latest conduct by the Iranian regime is no aberration. It is no outlier. Rather, it is all too in keeping with the fundamental nature and track record of this regime. Consistent with its previous conduct towards its own people, as we saw during the lethal repression of protesters led by Iranian women, following the death in custody of Mahsa Amini at the hands of Iran's so-called morality police. Or consistent with its destabilising actions towards its neighbours in the region, as we have seen in its backing of terrorist and extremist proxies of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of the Houthis, and militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and from Iran's barrage of missile attacks on Israel. And consistent too with Iran's malign global impact, whether it be in terms of weapons support for Russia against Ukraine or its nuclear programme. And consistent too with Iran's state threats activities on UK soil, posing danger to dissidents, journalists and the Jewish community here in the UK, with more than 20 potentially lethal Iran-backed plots over the last year alone, as tracked through the vital work of the UK's security agencies. So let me set out the action that the government is taking in coordination with allies in response to this consistent threat that the Iranian regime poses to the stability, security and freedom and to the UK national interest. First, on domestic security threats, we will not tolerate any Iran-backed threats on UK soil. In May, 3 Iranian nationals were charged with offences linked to the Iranian regime under the National Security Act in 2023, and I want to thank the police, security and intelligence services for their tireless work to keep us safe. Last year, we placed Iran on the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme to detect, deter and disrupt malign and undeclared efforts to undermine our democracy. We sanctioned the criminal Foxtrot network for the violent threats it posed against Jewish and Israeli targets in Europe on behalf of the Iranian regime. And we have geared up the UK's security infrastructure to better tackle hybrid threats. As Home Secretary, I commissioned the review by the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, Jonathan Hall, KC, into what more needed to be done so that we could apply counter-terrorism style powers, including on prescription, to state-backed threats as well. And we announced last year that the government will take forward the recommendations so we can deal with all the UK-based threats that we face. Second, support for British citizens. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first duty of any government is the safety and security of our citizens, and my department is working tirelessly to ensure the safety of British nationals in Iran. I spoke yesterday with the UK's ambassador in Tehran about the vital work that he and the team are doing on the ground, and the FCDO is in contact with the relevant Iranian authorities regarding detained British nationals, and their welfare in Iran remains a priority. We are, of course, deeply concerned that Craig and Lindsay Foreman have been charged with espionage in Iran, and just yesterday, Minister Faulkner met with members of the Foreman family, and we continue to raise this case directly with the Iranian authorities. Third, the coordinated economic and diplomatic pressure on this regime. This government and our predecessors have continually raised human rights violations in Iran through the UN and international forums, including most recently, this autumn, resolutions calling for an end to the regime's reprisals against women, against journalists, and against human rights campaigners. But then in October, alongside our E3 partners, France and Germany, the UK triggered the snapback process, which saw the reinstatement of 6 previously terminated UN sanctions resolutions on Iran. We did so because of the repeated failure by the Iranian regime to comply with its nuclear commitments. On the 1st of October, we updated domestic legislation to reapply extensive sanctions measures contained in these resolutions, also going further by designating 71 individuals and entities in sectors which have links to Iran's nuclear programme. Overall, this government has imposed over 220 Iran sanctions designations since coming into office. And we are backing strong sanctions enforcement. Just last week, the UK provided support to the US's seizure of Bella 1, accused of shadow fleet activities and Iran sanctions breaches. And at the time when the sanctions were reinstated in October, I also urged the Iranian regime, even then, to change their approach, to work with the international community to comply with their obligations. I told them then that it would take time to fully implement the UK's sanctions, and during that window they should start compliance and engagement with the international community and end the deception and obfuscation. They have not done so. Weapons inspectors still have not been given access, and far from changing their approach, we have seen instead a reversion to the most brutal forms of repression on their own streets. As a result, I can confirm the UK will bring forward legislation to implement full and further sanctions and sectoral measures. The UK has already designated key players in Iran's oil, energy, nuclear and financial systems. Further measures will target finance, energy, transport, software and other significant industries which are advancing Iranian nuclear escalation. And we will work further with the EU and other partners to explore what additional measures might now be needed in response to developments. And I also send a message to other countries who have sought to avoid implementing UN sanctions or to undermine the legitimacy of the UN sanctions reinstated following the snapback process, because no one should be supporting the kind of approach the Iranian regime is currently taking, and all member states should be fulfilling their UN obligations on such a grave and serious issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me say something else about the events in recent days. Just as they did in 2022, it's absolutely clear that the Iranian regime are trying to paint these protests as the result of foreign influence and instigation. They're using that accusation to try and whip up opposition to the protests amongst anti-Western Iranians and try to justify their vicious and sickening attacks on the ordinary civilians marching in the streets. These are nothing but lies and propaganda being spread by a desperate regime. They must not be allowed to undermine a genuine grassroots movement, drawing together people from all parts of Iranian society and spreading across multiple cities and regions. And that is why we and other governments across the world are determined not to play into the hands of the regime or to allow our words or actions to be twisted to support their lies and propaganda. And with a functioning embassy on the ground in Tehran and British nationals being held in Iranian jails, we recognise that responsibility, as previous governments have always done. In the last 18 months, we have taken stronger action to tackle Iranian threats at home and abroad than any recent government, and we have done so with broad cross-party support. That must continue. The world is watching Iran. And the UK will continue to confront the regime's lies, to call out its repression, and to take the steps necessary to protect the UK's interests. I commend this statement to the House.
There's nothing more important than keeping your money and your identity safe online. And with so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. But this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GBNews viewers. ExpressVPN is offering up to 73% off, plus 4 extra months free. That's top-level security from just £2.49 a month, and you're covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee. So just click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code now. Remember, when you're online, you are often sharing personal data, so hackers can steal your information, your passwords, your photos, and your bank details in just seconds. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your personal information. So why choose ExpressVPN? Well, it couldn't be easier to use. With just one click, you are protected. And ExpressVPN uses military-grade AES 256 encryption, which is the same standard trusted by the US government to guard their classified information. With their new tiered plans, you can protect up to 14 devices at once and manage passwords securely. Live chat support is available 24/7, and it typically connects you in under a minute with a real person. Click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code to get up to 73% off ExpressVPN plus 4 extra months free. Start protecting yourself today with ExpressVPN.
I call the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for sight of her statement earlier on. Every day for the last 2 weeks across Iran, we have seen brave and courageous men, women and children standing in defiance of a cruel and barbaric despotic regime which has suppressed lives and freedom for over 5 decades. People are being arrested, attacked and murdered in the streets. It has been reported that over 2,000 people have now been killed in Iran, with one report even suggesting that the real figure is over 12,000, and over 10,000 have been arrested, according to the human rights activists in Iran. Towns have been flooded with soldiers to suppress protests, and hospitals are overwhelmed with the injured and murdered. Thousands upon thousands of Iran's young, like the 23-year-old fashion student Rabina Amini, have been shot, killed, buried by the side of roads as they called for a free Iran. And we've seen reports of executions due to take place for those arrested just days earlier. We cannot let their dreams be buried as we mourn the victims of Tehran's atrocities. These were ordinary Iranians doing extraordinary things, fighting for their freedom. We stand with those brave Iranians, we back their calls for freedom, and we join demands for the regime to end. This is a regime whose cruelty goes beyond the brutality we have seen in recent days. The theocratic terrorists in Iran have for too long threatened regional security, from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthis backed by Iran. They have backed Putin's war in Ukraine and China's campaign of repression. They have ignored demands to stop their nuclear weapons program as they circumvent sanctions. They're holding British nationals, Craig and Lindsay Foreman, in cruel captivity. Iran is a hostile state and a threat to our country, a threat to the Middle East and a threat to the world, and Britain must have the resolve to deal with them. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, where is the government's resolve to stand up to Iran, back those protesting and work to bring about the end of the cruelty of this regime? As Iranian citizens are sacrificing their lives in the fight for their own liberation, what message of hope and reassurance does the Foreign Secretary give to those risking their lives on the streets of Iran each day? What is being done to challenge the Iranian regime over the violence it's conducting? What is her assessment of the numbers killed and injured? It is right that the Iranian ambassador has finally been summoned, but why has this only happened today? Well, the Foreign Secretary says she's spoken on the phone to her counterpart. What was his response? And did she raise with him the Foreman case? And what was his response? The Iranian regime now claims to have the protests under total control. What assessment has the government made of this claim? Britain and this House should stand with those campaigning for a free and democratic future, and if change comes, we should be ready to support this change. Given the statements from President Trump, what discussions have taken place with the US administration over their plans, and are we aligned with the US and our regional partners? Are all scenarios being considered and planned for, including the potential of UK-US military bases to stop brutality of the Iranian regime? And if the regime is being weakened, what assessment has been made of the risk Iran in terms of retaliating and escalating plots to undermine our security here? Madam Deputy Speaker, last year the US and Israel took direct action to protect Western and regional interests from Iran's nuclear threats. The then government refused to give a view at the time on those actions. They sat on the fence in a feeble attempt not to upset its backbench MPs. As people fight dying for their rights and for democracy, this is no time for weakness, and Britain should be robust in cutting off the Iranian regime and removing the funds they rely on. So will the Foreign Secretary state what further direct sanctions, and I know she's touched on some of this, will be placed specifically on the regime and its key henchmen in particular? Will she confirm that no one from that regime will ever step foot in our country and threaten the security of Britain should they try to flee Iran? Why has it taken so long to implement the reintroduction of sanctions under snapback? And on the IRGC, in opposition, Labour said they would prescribe the IRGC, but they had not done so in government. It is incumbent upon them to share their reasons for not doing so with the House. The Foreign Secretary refers to the report from Jonathan Hall, which she says they will take forward. And of course, that was 8 months ago. So when is this coming? And why was Downing Street briefing yesterday that prescription would not happen? Will they be prescribed? Madam Deputy Speaker, this side of the House will work with the government in the national interest and in the interest of global security and stability to pass legislation and other measures needed to keep us safe from Iran and put maximum pressure on this despotic regime. So a suggestion for the Foreign Secretary. Instead of legislating for the £35 billion surrender of Chagos, will she use the time we have in this House to deal with the IRGC and Iran, the regime, and keep us safe, and even use the $35 billion to bolster our defences, because at this critical moment, Britain must do all we can to stand with Iranians fighting for their freedom and to protect them and us from Tehran's threat.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say I do agree with the Shadow Foreign Secretary in her condemnation of the brutality and the horrendous actions of the Iranian regime and the threats that it poses. I would say to her, she will know that when she was Home Secretary and when I was Shadow Home Secretary, we strongly supported the national security actions on Iran. In fact, I said specifically that I hope the House will be able to come together to support our national security and defend our democracy. And I would urge the honourable members opposite to see this as the same cross-party approach to defending our national security, but also the regional stability as well, because the scale of the truly brutal and horrendous actions in Iran mean that we should stand together in condemnation of that action and also in the action that we need to take in concert with our allies, including on further sanctions, including on further pressure, immediate pressure on the regime as well. She asked for my assessment on the scale of what is happening. Like her, I have seen the reports that suggest there may have been 2,000 people killed, there may have been more. My fear is that the number will prove to be significantly higher because we are currently getting so little information because of the internet blackout that the regime has instigated, because they are trying to hide what they have done and the consequences of it. And that is why we are also talking to other countries about what can be done swiftly to try to restore some sort of internet access or phones communication to people across Iran as well. She asks about the Foremans. I directly raised the Foremans directly with the Iranian regime just before Christmas, and we continue to raise this case because it is a huge consular priority for us, and we are too also in close touch not just with the US but also with other allies across Europe, across the G7 as well, and looking further at what the sanctions measures are that we need to take. She asked about the snapback. She will know that obviously this had been a running issue for very many years, the non-compliance with the nuclear regime. The previous Conservative government had not taken the snapback action. We did take the snapback action. It was supported on a cross-party basis. I hope again that that will remain so because it was clear that that compliance was not taking place. And that work was done in conjunction not just with the E3, the France and Germany, but also with our US allies, many conversations with them about this as well. And then she also raised the issue around the IRGC, which again, she will know that, again, the previous government also had this issue raised with them over very many years. And I have raised particularly this issue about the legislation and the need to reform the legislation. And that is exactly why I commissioned the Jonathan Hall review, because I was concerned that legislation designed for terrorism threats was not applicable in the same way to state-backed threats, and we need to ensure that we can deal with the hybrid and state-backed threats that the country now faces. Now it needs the international community to come together on this. In the face of this brutality from the Iranian regime, we need that concerted action, not just around sanctions, not just around the enforcement of the existing sanctions, but also around the overwhelming pressure. We will pursue that through the UN. We will pursue that through every avenue we can. The world is watching Iran. The world needs to be watching, and the world needs to stand together against the brutality that we have seen.
Aubrey?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the question now is, what is Donald Trump going to do next? And there must be many people in the Foreign Office trying to second guess what he may do. And the question is will we give support to Donald Trump if he decides to take action against the Iranian regime?
Just to briefly break into what the Foreign Affairs Select Committee chairwoman is saying, Donald Trump has posted in the last few moments an astonishing tweet on this very subject. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, calls on Iranian patriots to keep protesting, to take over your institutions, the words of the American president. He says, I have cancelled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. He promises help is on its way and signs off with the word MIGA, Make Iran Great Again.
Wow. I mean, he's serious, isn't he? And he's also, as we pointed out earlier today, told Americans who are in Iran to leave. So something is, I suspect, going to be happening soon, but we'll just keep an eye on the story and see where it goes.
Well, that is the astonishing thing. The words help is on its way suggests that there could be some sort of American intervention in this situation. And that would go against the words of the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, who just some moments ago in the House of Commons was saying that she did not want to do anything that would play into the hands of the regime, that would play into their narrative that this is a foreign-backed counter-revolution. She wants to make clear that the British position is that this is a grassroots movement against the Islamic Republic. This is Iranian people leading this. And I think the British government fears that if the Americans get involved perhaps with strikes or anything else, that it looks like it's American regime change rather than grassroots Iranian action.
Well, and Priti Patel did kick back actually at Yvette Cooper because she asked where is the government's resolve to stand up against Iran. She said, what is our message of hope to the Iranian people, and what is Yvette Cooper's assessment on those who have been killed or injured? She talked about the Iranian regime, and they claim to have protesters under control, and Priti Patel challenged Yvette Cooper and said, what is her assessment of that claim? So it does sound like there are, there's serious issues happening there, and we'll obviously follow all of it.
Very serious, as the Foreign Secretary was saying. I mean, there are British nationals that are currently held in Iranian prisons. There's a functioning British embassy in Tehran. That's unlike the Americans. And so there are some British interests here. I think they fear this destabilisation, although, of course, the Foreign Secretary was announcing further sanctions for regime officials and indeed for Iranian industries too.
Well, Priti Patel did ask, though, what will she use her time in the House to deal with the IRGC? And that is something that people are talking about. Some people asking it to be proscribed as a terrorist organisation. And also Kim Badenoch yesterday saying that she doesn't want any IRGC to come here and seek refuge in this country.
Well, this is a clearly fast-moving and developing story. Do